Hello and welcome to Stories, the True and the Fictional. As you can tell from the slightly different style of music, this is going to be a slightly different style of episode. It's something we call Story Chat, where we sit down with an author, a filmmaker, or any kind of storyteller really, and talk to them about their life and their work in a real fun and laid back way. So sit back, relax. Unless you're going for a jog, then run faster. It's story time.
Hello and welcome to Stories, the True and the Fictional. We have with us today Matthew Holmes, all the way from South Australia, Melbourne. Where are you today, Matt?
I'm in Melbourne, originally from South Australia, but I live in Melbourne now.
Yep, cool. Thanks for coming on.
Oh, thank you for having me. Should be fun.
Should be interesting. Do you just, for those random people from the internet that don't know much about you, just want to tell us a bit about you and what you do?
Sure. I'm an independent filmmaker from Australia. I am a writer and director, producer. I have spent the last 20-something years trying to carve out a career as that in this country, which has proved a very challenging pathway. And yeah, I spend my days supporting myself however I can with other bits of like television and commercial work and things like that. And in the meantime, I write scripts, develop projects, and occasionally get fortunate enough to go out and actually film something. So that's sort of my life in a nutshell.
Cool. Well, we're going to hit you with the icebreakers we give everyone. So, Ryan, you want to take the first one?
I will. Okay. So this one is the one that sort of just covers the, you know, what you believe, like what you believe in and what you're passionate about. So if you could get rid of one thing in this world, what would it be?
I think if I could get rid of one thing in the world, it would be poverty. Because I'm a big believer that that the root of all crime stems back to poverty.
Yeah.
If very few crimes are ever committed out of, just because people are completely horrible. There always will be those. But I think poverty seems to be the root from which a huge amount of crime and societal problems emerge. So if I could eradicate anything, I'd just get rid of poverty.
Yep.
So yeah.
Couldn't agree more.
So you, just for the record, you're choosing poverty over The Last Jedi.
Yes. if whoever's giving me this wish, I would definitely tap him on the shoulder and say, hey, could you get rid of this Last Jedi while we're at it?
Well, I mean, you did say you wanted to get rid of poverty, which is the main cause of crime. And to me, The Last Jedi is definitely a crime. So you might have knocked it all off.
Yeah, well, hopefully there's some, in some way, if it undoes The Last Jedi, then that's the best wish anyone can ask for.
We just have to connect the Ryan Johnson to poverty.
That's right. Somehow.
Well, it still remains the only Star Wars movie I have not finished watching.
Right.
I've watched the others many hundreds of times, but yeah, no.
It is the last Star Wars film I watched. And after that one, I walked out of the cinema and was like, I'm done. Yeah, that's it. So
exactly.
That was the end of that.
All right. Something on your bucket list.
Ooh. I would love to make a film with Sam Rockwell.
Oh, yes.
That's a bucket list. If I could ever make a movie and work with Sam Rockwell, I would die a very happy filmmaker. So.
Okay, if I can expand on that, if you were able to do that and he reached out somehow and said, let's do a movie, what kind of movie would you do with him?
Oh, I would like to make a. I don't actually know, but okay. if I could choose the genre, I think it would be a character piece, and it would be probably something that has something that's quite funny, but also a dark edge to it as well, because I think that's where he sits best. So I don't know. Maybe I'll be fortunate enough that in like 20 years' time, when he's an actor that, sort of in the Harrison Ford sort of caliber, and I might be established enough in 20 years' time to hire him and I can make a movie with him as an older gentleman, still being Sam Rockwell, I'd be really happy with that. So, but I've got 20 years to write that script and pitch it to him. So I'll figure that out as I go.
Excellent.
Cool.
Okay, so the next one's another one of my favorite questions. We do look, we're very open, but we will judge you on this answer. Please tell us what you think the greatest sitcom ever made is.
Okay, the greatest sitcom. I'll be honest and tell you, I don't watch a lot of sitcoms, especially don't watch a lot of American ones, if any. So I'm not a great, I don't have a great thing. I'm aware of all the sitcoms, but I don't watch a lot of them. But for me, there's what I think is the greatest sitcom, and then there's what is my favorite sitcom, and they're two different things. I like them both, but there's my favorite, and then what I think, but the greatest I think is actually a superior sitcom. I'll go with this with what I think is the greatest sitcom, and that is the BBC version of The Office.
Yes. I'm a massive Ricky Gervais fan, so you're always gonna yes, and yes.
So for me, it's The Office. That is the best sitcom. For me. My favorite sitcom, though, the one that I return to all the time and find it as funny as the first time, is The IT Crowd.
Yeah, I'm just watching it at the moment. Well done.
So
I agree.
That's my favorite, but I think Office is the best. So, and I'm always going to choose British comedy over any other sitcom. So.
Yeah, I agree. I've fallen down that rabbit hole in the last 5-6 years when I first saw Ricky Gervais's Office, and then I went on and I watched things like Extras. Afterlife on Netflix at the moment was I really enjoyed that. That's another Ricky Gervais one. Derek, stuff like that as well. Yeah, I agree with you. Bring it on. British sitcoms are fantastic.
Yeah. I thought maybe I would say Fawlty Towers, the original, but I watched it again recently. I bought it on Blu-ray and watched, and while it's classic and you can't knock it, it's still not quite as clever as I think as The Office.
No,
I think comedy's gotten better and they've advanced it a bit more, but it's still great.
Perfect.
All right. Do you have a zombie apocalypse plan?
To be honest, I don't. I think I would probably just do like everyone would, which is pack the car with all my camping gear, head for the mountains, and try to pick up a firearm along the way.
Yep.
And that would be my apocalypse plan. And try to grow vegetables. So that would be it. So I'd grab my dog, grab the missus, and off I'd go. So I've got a good club. I've got like a mattock handle that I cut down to size that I keep for home protection. I'd be carrying that. So
excellent. Yeah, look, you can't go wrong with the mountains. Like there's so much. Like just go bush. So many places to hide. So many things you can actually just pick up on your way and use as weapons if needed.
Exactly. So, I'd probably, it'd be like an overcrowded camping space up in the mountains, I think, in a zombie apocalypse. So, but
everyone would have their generators going. And
yes, exactly. Attracting everything. Yeah. I will say I'm not actually a big zombie fan. I don't like zombie movies. I don't watch hardly any of them. I don't watch The Walking Dead. I haven't seen World War Z or anything like that. I just don't like the whole. But I really like the 28 Days Later, 28 Weeks Later. I really like those films. They were like, okay, I can get into this because they didn't feel like zombie films. They felt like they were infected,
Yeah.
And so it was a bit different, and they moved fast and not slow, and so I thought they were great. Those ones.
Yeah. Perfect. Yeah, good. It feels more like a survival horror rather than a zombie.
Like the dead have risen. Yeah,
exactly. Oh, fantastic. Okay, the last of our icebreaker questions. You've just gotten a call from Elon Musk, and he said, "Look, I've selected you, Matthew Holmes, to test drive the new electric time machine. What do you do?"
Oh, man. I thought long and hard about this thing because there's a lot of things, It was like I want to go back to the beginning to see how we all got here, for sure.
Yeah.
But it's like, I will still come back and people wouldn't believe me. So I thought, you know what? I'm just going to do what Marty McFly did. I'm just going to go get a sports almanac and set myself up for life.
Yeah.
That's what I'm
well done. Well
I'm just
done.
going to bet on. I'm just going to get all the scores, make bets, and just make movies. So I'm afraid Marty had the right idea.
Yeah.
And then you can also go back to when Sam Rockwell was a little baby and just subliminally just say your name in his ear over and over and over again. And then you'll meet him one day and it'll trigger him in his mind and you'll make that movie.
Yeah. He will go, Matthew Holmes.
Exactly.
It'll feel like home to him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, excellent. Right. Great answers.
Well, you passed the icebreakers.
Yes.
So let's get down to business.
Yes.
Where did it all begin for you with your filmmaking?
Well, it began when I was about 13 or 14 years old, and I grew up without a television most of my life because my parents were both it was the 80s, so they were very poverty stricken, and because of the recession and so on. And so we ended up swapping our TV for a car with a relative. And so I grew up without TV, and we only ended up having TV on the weekends because my dad would work at a school and he'd bring the television home from the school so we could watch videos. Yeah. So I had very little exposure to movies. And then when I started seeing them, it was overwhelming because I didn't grow up watching them like a kid, just watching TV after school and stuff. So when I finally started seeing things, it was just overwhelming for me, and I just completely fell in love with movies, and immediately how they were made. And so I knew pretty much from that age that this is where I wanted to make movies. But I was also hugely into drawing at the time, and so drawing and art, sculpture, it sort of just immediately I found a love of animation and started doing animation in the stop motion sense, because I was a big fan of like the Jason and the Argonauts and the Empire Strikes Back, and they have got stop motion in them, and so I learned all about that. So it sort of was a love of of drawing and art, and of course love of movies, and that all sort of came together. And I knew from that age I wanted to make movies. I knew from age 14 I wanted to make a Ned Kelly movie, and so I've just carried that with me ever since, and have just been laser focused on being a filmmaker from that age up to today.
Excellent.
It's just I've just varied and broken out from animation, but I always knew that animation wouldn't be a permanent thing for me. So,
okay. Speaking about, you've mentioned the stop motion. So how did you get into it? And is it as tedious and frustrating as we can imagine it might be?
It is. I wouldn't say it's tedious. It's time consuming and it's extremely finicky. Absolutely. And, I spent 3 years making a 13-minute animated film. Like, it just takes, there's not a lot of screen time payoff for the amount of work you put in. You don't get a lot of screen time in minutes for your work. That for me was the thing that ultimately sort of sealed the deal for me to kind of walk away from animation for good, because there's so much time and effort goes into it, and then you just don't get a lot of screen time for your effort. And I was working as a professional stop motion animator in an animation company in Adelaide, and after 10 years of doing that, mostly working on commercials and short films, I just got tired of it, and was more, my heart was going more and more to live action drama, so I wanted to go there. Tedious, yes, but it's also but like any part of filmmaking, all filmmaking has that tedious aspect to it. Like editing, it's very, very finicky. When you're out there directing, it's very, very finicky, and so it doesn't really feel any more or less tedious to me than any other aspect of filmmaking, like writing a script or editing the movie. It's just as tedious. I think it requires someone who's got a lot of patience, stop motion, but it all seemed to make a lot of sense to me. I never sort of was like, oh, this sucks, one frame at a time, because every frame made sense and I was working towards something, and it just felt kind of normal. Like drawing a picture, it doesn't instantly happen. You've got to spend the time, and animation's much the same. So, and unfortunately, stop motion has become a bit of a dying art, and it's not done as much. But I'm really hoping if my career can can blossom into something where I get a lot more opportunities, I really want to make a movie that does what the old movies did, where they blend stop motion with live action.
Okay.
And I think with technology today, we can do it in a way that has not been ever done before, and actually start blending those two mediums again in a highly stylized way. So I don't think my stop motion days are over, but they're sort of in hiatus.
Excellent.
Maybe you can do a very dramatized version of the Smacko ads, like put some real backstory into it.
I've done about as much as I want of Schmacko ads, I tell you. I've done too many Schmacko ads in my time.
Yeah.
And I think I've animated. Well, it works because I'm a dog lover. Dogs are, me and dogs are like that. I can't go past a dog without wanting to pet it. But I've animated dogs more than probably anything in anything else in my life, with Schmackos and the home hardware ads. So, probably no more dogs.
Well, I noticed you're obviously a massive dog lover when you mentioned on the zombie apocalypse plan that you grab your dog and then your wife. So
in that order.
Oh, excellent.
All right. Well, so let's talk about how you dived into full features, because Twin Rivers, brilliant film.
Yes.
I absolutely loved it.
Good. You've actually managed to see it.
Yeah. No, I tagged you when I watched it years ago, and I asked my mum wanted to know how many takes the flips took and all that stuff.
Oh, right. Oh, I forgot about that. Oh, okay, cool.
Well, it's been a while.
That's been a while.
What? Just want to talk. Where did the idea come from? Why did you choose for it to be a period piece, kind of in the 30s? Was it set?
Yeah, in the late 30s. Well, I started that project around 2001. I didn't finish it till 2007, so it took me 6 years to make. Like I said, I was in animation at the time, but I knew I wanted to get into live action, and so I wanted to start playing with live action, and I bought myself a DV cam camera, which was the new format at the time and the best format for young filmmakers, because I couldn't afford to shoot on film. It was too expensive. And the only other format, it was either film or VHS. Now, VHS sucked as a format, and I've done plenty of VHS movies in my teenage years, and it doesn't look good. But when DV cam came out, it was like, right, now I can make something. There was no such thing as high definition back then. It wasn't even a word. No one even knew what high definition meant. And digital cameras like we use today weren't even invented. So I got that and wanted something. I was like, what do I shoot? And what I did was, I sort of was inspired by my favorite director, which is Peter Weir, the Australian director. And the movie Gallipoli was one of the first films I saw as a kid. Remember, so going back to when I first started watching movies and being introduced to them, my dad, knowing that I love, war movies and war stuff and Australian soldiers, he said, well, let's watch Gallipoli. And it was one of the first films I saw as like a 13-year-old or something. And I was absolutely blown away by that movie, emotionally destroyed by that movie. But that was I think one of the seminal films in my life, that when I watched Gallipoli and I realized the power that a movie could have, like how a movie could make you feel. Yeah, I think it's the thing that stunned me more than anything, is about how movies can make you feel. So, because I very much lived in my imagination as a kid, and when I saw movies, it was like, wow, movies can take everything in here that I think and feel, and I can put them on there, and other people can see them and feel what I'm thinking and feeling. So that's why I wanted to make movies. And so that was a huge influence. And therefore, Twin Rivers was there's echoes of Gallipoli in it. Not that there's a war in it, but everything before that takes place before the war is very visually similar to Twin Rivers. The two guys walking through the desert, their clothing and all that. So, and that just started off as a 15, 20-minute short film with my brother, like a bit of a mood piece. Didn't really have much of a story. I love the 1940s period. I just wanted to play in that world for a bit. And I just thought, well, wouldn't it be interesting, a story about a couple of guys traveling as swaggies? And, and it wasn't much to it. But as we started filming, and then we wrote a bit more, and then we filmed that, and we wrote a bit more, and then as it was going, it kept growing into this feature. And then eventually it was a 40-minute film, and then it was 50, 60, then it was an hour, and now it's 90 minutes. And over the years, the story kept changing, and new characters got added, and then we reshot old scenes because the ones we did 2 or 3 years ago sucked. So we reshot them, and more money came in, and I was paying for all this with my savings. And that's how it sort of was born. And then it took me 2 years to edit it, put it all together, and get help with sound and things like that. I had a lot of trouble. Pretty much once I shot the movie, it took me 4 years to shoot it. Then I really had and I could edit it myself by then because digital editing had come in and you could do it on your home computer by now. So it was still pretty new. But so I had an edited film, but I had no way to finish the sound, and it needed a lot of sound work, and I couldn't afford the sound. And I tried the Film Corporation in South Australia to try to give me a grant to help me, and I got rejected. So, but you may know the Australian filmmaker Rolf de Heer.
I've heard the name.
He did 10 Canoes, The Tracker, Bad Boy Bubby.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, he was Adelaide based at the time, and everyone sort of knew, we all knew who Rolf de Heer was, but someone in my film crew knew Rolf. He had worked on a film of Rolf's a few years ago, and he introduced me to Rolf. And so I would just send Rolf, and he was gracious to see what I was doing and encouraging and so on. And then I just sort of kept in touch with how I was going. And then when he found out that the Film Corporation wasn't going to help me, he sort of took me under his wing and helped me recut the movie. Like I took my computer around to his house for a period of 2 months and just left it there. And then twice a week would go to his house, and he'd sit in his living lounge room, and I would sit there on the computer hooked up to his TV, and he'd sit there and he would sort of help me recut the movie. Because he said the cut that I had, which was like 2 hours and a bit, he said, there's some fundamental errors in the storytelling and the structure of your movie, but we can fix them. So I sat there, and it was like having a 2-month film course education with Rolf de Heer, listening to him point out and help me cut my movie into a tight, to the tight thing that it was. And then he helped me write the voiceover, and because I was having trouble with that. And then he started bringing on people that he knew, that he had worked with on sound and all that, and got them to help me and do it for free. So I sort of owe him a lot because he helped me get the film to the finish, and I learned so much along the way through him. And so that's sort of the Twin Rivers story. And boom, 6 years later, after starting it, it finally came out. It got sold to a cable channel and in Australia, and it got a DVD release here, but it really didn't do much more beyond that. It didn't do any film festivals or anything like that. It didn't go very far, but and in hindsight, it was a bit of a hard sell as well, because it had no stars. It was a period piece. It was drama. That's a hard thing to sell for a low budget indie film.
Yeah.
But I didn't want to go the route that everyone else was going, which was, I thought that if I could make a period piece look really authentic and tell a really good story, and that would impress people, and then they would give me more work or give me a job or, give me a grant to make another film, rather than just go the horror way and make a shocky horror with blood and people getting offed and everything. Because as I was doing Twin Rivers, Wolf Creek was just coming out. And that was a huge success. And I thought, I don't want to go down the violent horror way. That's not really the kind of films I want to make. And I thought this would impress people if I could pull it off on a low budget. But it really didn't impress anybody. So it was a bit of so it sort of fizzled on. It was sort of dead on arrival in a way. So it was a bit disappointing when I finished it.
Now we move on to what I really enjoyed as I'm not a massive fan of, I hope I don't offend you when I say this, of Bushranger films. I've seen some and in talking with Jamie, I think it is because of the inaccuracies. And I'm a history buff. I love my history. And I'm one to sit there and go, well, that's not right, But then I sat down and watched your film, The Legend of Ben Hall. and it immediately wanted me. I want you to do a Ned Kelly film. Like it's not even if I. Yeah. So tell us about The Legend of Ben Hur, how that all came about, how that was made and everything, because I think it's a fantastic film.
Oh, thank you. I'm glad that it appealed to you, even though you're not usually a Bushranger fan. Yeah. But I think, one of the things that I think one of the reasons maybe why you responded to it is that even though, yes, I made a Bushranger film and I love Bushrangers and all that, what I didn't try to do was make a Bushranger film.
No.
And I see a lot of productions where they've tried to make a Bushranger movie, but what I tried to make was the story of a man who happened to be a Bushranger.
Yes.
And tell the true story of a man who happened to be a Bushranger. So it's a shift of I guess, approach to the material, because I see it when I see a lot of low budget Westerns, like American Westerns. You can tell they love Westerns and they've gone out to make a Western. And so suddenly everyone's acting like cliches and stereotypes that we see in Westerns, because they think they're making a Western. So they're pulling out all of the Western tropes. And rather than just making a film about characters that's set in the West, it'll become a Western just by that virtue alone. But you're not trying to force it to be this stereotypical Western. So that sort of was the approach with Ben Hur. Don't try to make it a Bushranger film, make it about this man. I started after Twin Rivers. I was, okay, what am I going to do next? And I was actually telling a friend of mine that I was writing another film with that I still want to make, called Territorial, which is an Australian monster movie about the bunyip.
Oh, awesome.
And I wanted to. We were writing that together, and I remember saying, "Man, like I said, I always want to make a Ned Kelly film." And so I said to my friend, "It really sucks they made that Heath Ledger film in 2002, because I always wanted to make a Ned Kelly film. Now I can't." And then he said, "Well, there's more interesting Bushrangers out there than Ned Kelly." And I thought, and I never heard of any. And he said, "Look up Ben Hur and Frank Gardner." So I did that, fell in love with the story immediately, bought all the books, read them in 2 weeks, and then I was writing a screenplay. And for the next 2 years after Twin Rivers, I was writing this Ben Hur screenplay. And then it turned out to be 300 pages long. It was that fat. It was the entire chronicle of Gardner, Ben Hur, the whole lot. And I started trying to shop that around, and every single person I took it to in the film corporation, the producers that I knew, the people, like the connections I'd made with Twin Rivers, every single one of them said, "You will never make this as your second feature, ever. It's too big. No one wants to see Bushranger films. No one knows who Ben Hur is. Forget about it. It's too expensive." And because this is going to be like a $30 million movie, huge. And so I had to accept that. I put it on the shelf, and I thought, I'll make that when I'm 55 years old and I've got 10 films under my belt and I can afford it. And I've got the power to make that film. And then the years went by. I was trying to get all these other projects off the ground and they weren't happening. And then I remember thinking, I really would just love to play in the Ben Hur world for a little bit and maybe shoot a little something that could be like a teaser to show what Ben Hur could be. Yeah. Because the script that I had written was starting to get some interest in America. Some American people had seen it. They wanted to option it, and they actually wanted to sort of option it off of me and then try to get a big director like Mel Gibson or someone else to direct it, because they really loved the idea. And so I thought, well, there's still something here. I think the Americans might like my Ben Hur movie. And that sort of reignited my interest, and that's what gave me the idea. Well, why don't I make a little piece of the movie? Why don't I just shoot the last 10, 15 pages of my script, like the death of Ben Hur? Why don't I shoot that? And that can be my calling card for potentially making a feature. And that's why I ran the Kickstarter campaign for it. And it was really ambitious, $75,000. I didn't think I'd get there, but I knew I couldn't do it for cheaper. And we ended up getting $130,000. So there was just such an interest in it. So we decided we'd make it a 40-minute film, and because we had extra money. and we started shooting that, and we shot for about 2 or 3 weeks, and it was a bit of a disaster. We didn't get everything we needed. There were problems, weather, there's all these issues that we had. We had bitten off more than we could chew, but our footage was really cool. And we looked back at what we'd shot and we're like, wow, that looks really cool. So all I could do with this footage, because it was incomplete, was all I could do was cut a trailer. So I cut a trailer and I showed some producers that I was working on other projects with, and they saw that trailer and they were like, whoa, this looks amazing. You should make this a feature. I said, well, I can't. You're not going to be able to get me my $30 million for the whole thing. They said, well, can't you do it for about $1 million? Make it for $1 million. You've already shot, 20% of the movie. Now go and we'll get a little bit of money and we'll finish the rest. I said, it can't be done. It's a gigantic movie. And they said, well, make it smaller. So I thought, I didn't actually want to do it. I thought, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to compromise my Ben Hall movie. But I thought, look, the doors seem to be opening. So what I did is I took that Ben Hall script and I ripped out the first 2/3 of it and then got the last act of that movie. And then I just expanded that into the full feature. And then we managed to scrounge up enough private investment based on that trailer that I'd cut, enough private investment to then keep filming and put it all together and make the movie that you see today. So that's sort of how it came into being. It wasn't my intention to make that Ben Hall film my next film. I wanted to make the big expensive one 20 years from now.
Yeah.
But for some reason, this version of Ben Hall wanted to be born, and we just followed the trail.
Yeah.
Well, as I said, you've got someone like Jamie who loves the Bushrangers, like Bushrangers, and knows all this, and then you've got someone like me who has only seen the Heath Ledger Ned Kelly movie, and for me to watch this movie today, as I said to Jamie as soon as it was finished, I want him to do a Ned Kelly movie because it will be the most accurate, the most amazing Ned Kelly story ever told.
Well, that's our goal, and we have a project. We have a Ned Kelly project all lined up. We have been pitching it to Amazon Prime, Netflix Australia, Stan, Apple TV. I've got a whole brochure about it. I think I got it right here with me, actually. It's called Glen Rowan. And we showed him this little brochure. We've plotted out this epic 6-part miniseries.
Wow.
Which is an hour. Every episode is an hour long, and it starts pretty much when Ned Kelly as a young man and the problems he had with the law, and then when he hid out in the mountains and killed those cops. It starts there and then it ends at his sort of execution, and it's 6 episodes, so it's 6 hours. And we've got it all planned out. We know where we're going to film it. We know all that stuff. I've got really great Ned Kelly historian people involved, but we just can't get the traction on it. And we did try. We really did try. But I think that'll just have to be one of those projects that I'm going to put over there, and when the time is right, it's going to happen. But yeah, it'll. I really want it to be the Ned Kelly film to end all Ned Kelly films.
Yeah.
The one where once you've seen that, there's no reason to make another one. That's it. Like that'll just be the Ned Kelly movie or the Ned Kelly series or whatever, the definitive telling of that story, and the lengths and the historical accuracy that we've gone to already just in the script, because we've written some of the scripts already. It's just it's mind-boggling the level of detail of historical research that's gone into it already. So I really hope to get a chance to make that one day.
Yeah,
Definitely.
Well, on the topic of inaccuracies in films, because a lot of these Ned Kelly films have inaccuracies. Like when I watched the Heath Ledger one, I didn't know much about Ned Kelly, and then I learned about Ned Kelly, and then I got really annoyed.
I was exactly the same.
Yeah. So
I went to the theater. I heard they're making a Ned Kelly film. I saw they got Heath Ledger, and I thought that's a great choice. But I was pissed that they had made, because I was in the second year of shooting Twin Rivers, and then they announced, and because I was like, I'm going to make Twin Rivers, and that's going to give me the key to make my Ned Kelly film.
Yeah.
But then all of a sudden they announced a Ned Kelly film. And I was like, oh no, I'm too late. You know, I missed the boat. My career didn't take off. And so, but I was like, oh, well, they got Heath Ledger and they've got a huge budget. It's probably going to be great. So I rocked up opening weekend to see Ned Kelly. And I honestly didn't actually know much about Ned Kelly. I just knew Man in the Armor and I thought that was cool. And I'd never seen a Ned Kelly film. I watched it and then I sort of walked out of the theater thinking, I liked it, I think. I thought it would be more than I thought the story would be grander than that. Like I thought it would be bigger. And I thought it was pretty meh. And then when I learnt about it, I was like, oh, they missed the mark.
Yeah.
They had a huge budget and a great story and they shaved it down to something almost unrecognizable.
Yeah. So I think remembering watching it, I think I enjoyed it as a film. Like I enjoyed Heath Ledger playing Ned Kelly. I enjoyed, the supporting cast. Jeffrey Rush was great. Yeah, but even the soundtrack, I enjoyed the soundtrack. But then
it's beautiful music. I listen to the music a lot, actually. Yeah.
But Bernard Fanning, wasn't it? He did that song for it.
Yep. That it had some really good stuff in that production. Actually, a lot of the costumes in Ben Hur were from the Ned Kelly film. They all have little tags on the back that say Ned Kelly because our costume designer had bought a lot of the Ned Kelly stock after that film was made. So there's a bit of crossover there. But I thought it had aspects that were really good. But what I went for when I went to see that Ned Kelly, I culturally knew enough about Ned Kelly that his last stand was going to be huge. It was going to be this, he's going to duke it out with the cops in his armor and it was going to be big, And then in that film, he's down in I timed it 25 seconds.
Wow.
From getting up and starting to shoot, from him then hitting the dirt and he's caught, 25 seconds. And I just thought, and that's what I came to the movie to see. I came to see the showdown.
Yeah.
And that's the showdown I got. And I was like, and what I thought leaving the theater is I wanted the showdown. And then I thought, oh, well, I guess that's what really happened. He must have just got shot a couple of times and we've all made a big deal about it.
Yeah.
But then I found out, no, that gunfight went for about 25 minutes. That showdown with Ned Kelly shooting at the cops lasted 25 minutes.
Yeah.
And that's when I thought, there's more to be done here.
Yeah.
And so that's the version of the Ned Kelly story that we want to tell in our series called Glen Rowan, where we will dedicate half an entire episode to that shootout.
Oh, you have to.
Ned Kelly and the cops.
Yeah.
So, so like you, I was a bit, once you learn, you're like, oh well. But back to your question, why do you think films take liberties? I think there's a number of reasons they take liberties. Number one, and I think this is probably the biggest one, and probably the biggest one that I get annoyed about, is they just don't respect the history.
Yeah.
And they don't respect that they have a responsibility to tell the history as accurately as that it is within your means.
Yep.
We know you can never do it fully accurate, and even Ben Hur is not 100% accurate. It's just as accurate as I could be with what I had, the money that I had, the time I had, and also the amount of screen time that I had.
Yeah.
So I made it as accurate as I could within those bounds. So I feel like I did my best to do that and honor the spirit of the history. And because you've always got to make a nip and a tuck, and you've always got to, shorten things. And I understand it, and I don't mind if films do that. But when they completely disregard or disrespect the history, and there's not even a sense of duty of care to the history, because people are going to watch it and think that's real, especially if you slap based on a true story. And when they do something that's completely off the rails, that I just think that's disrespectful to the history, and that annoys me more than anything. I also think they do it, if they're changing it too far, I just keep asking, well, then why do you want to tell this true story? Isn't it interesting enough on its own? Why do you want to change it? And usually they're not great reasons. They're, their studios saying, oh, you need a love interest. You got to have a love interest. And that's what happened to Ned Kelly. They put that character in because that Naomi Watts character in because the studio demanded it. and they wanted it more like a Robin Hood movie, so they took out some of the complexities of Ned Kelly being, you know, maybe a bit more grey and a bit more flawed. Because Ned Kelly's a pretty flawed character, and they wanted him to be more heroic. So studio notes come down, and that's a bad reason to change history, because studio notes, you know. So, I think those are the two big reasons. They just don't care, or they're just doing it for the wrong reasons, like they were trying to get more bums on seats or something. So frustrating.
I'm going to let you take the next question, Jamie, because I really want to talk about. I really want to talk about something. The next one.
So, just in general, like, what do you look for in a film? Like when you're sitting down, you're watching a film. What makes it good?
Yep, that was a good question, and one I thought long and hard about before we jumped on. What makes a movie good, and what do I look for in a movie? Personally, I don't give a shit about genre. I'll watch any movie in any genre, nearly any genre, and I think a good movie can be anything. I think what it is what makes a movie good, though, I think is twofold. It usually comes down to two things. Good filmmaking. I think you've got to have someone who's telling this story, the director or the team with the director, that understand the craft of telling a story with film. You know, you can have all the bells and the whistles and the budget and everything, but if you haven't got craftsmen from the director down who know what they're doing, it doesn't matter how good your script is, and it doesn't matter if your story is good, it'll still stink. Because there's not that understanding of the cinematic language, and that's telling the story through this medium, because it is a medium that requires a lot of understanding if you want to go out and make one, which is why, you know, amateur films, for whatever reason, they just, you know, it's not just they haven't got any money, but they just suck, or many of them suck. And they're just unwatchable, and you just don't want to turn them off, because there's not good craft there, and they don't know how to tell a story using the medium. So you've got to have those people. And secondly, I think you've got to have a really good foundation, which is your screenplay, your story, and in tandem, a good story and a good screenplay. One that knows the principles that hook an audience and create, make people sit there and pay attention. And that's actually harder than people realize. It is a story that will make someone sit for 2 hours and pay attention, especially nowadays when your phone is next to you and you can just go, you know. So you've got to hold, and I think that's something that film, I never did film school. Twin Rivers was my film school. So I learned a lot of this stuff along the way and picked it up from the mentors and the people, like the directors I work with at Anifex, Rolf de Heer and other people. I learned this because I knew I loved films, but I didn't actually truly understand them as much. When I made Twin Rivers, I didn't understand the craft of filmmaking as much as I understand it now. But it is like baking a cake. There's a recipe that makes this stuff work.
Yeah.
And if you learn the recipe, you can actually make a movie interesting if you follow the recipe. But there is a recipe. It's not magic, and it's not because you've got a great idea. There is actually a plan to it and a formula. Now, the formula can go too far, like Hollywood. Once they got hold of the formula, they tried to add it to everything, and you get formulaic movies. I think you need to have creativity, but you got to know those basics. And that was one of the things that Rolf really taught me. When he saw my film, he could see that I knew the language of cinema enough to shoot scenes correctly, direct actors properly, but he saw that I didn't know how to structure the movie properly. And that's what he taught me, how to structure the movie. First act, second act, first act turn, mid act turn, third act turn, inciting incidents, all those things. I had those items were in my story sort of almost by subconscious, but they had to be shaped. And I think if filmmakers can learn that formula, they can learn those principles, you almost can't go wrong. And so I think that's what makes a good movie, because if you tell me, I don't know, what do you think's a good movie? Just pull one out of, what's a favorite?
My favorite is Back to the Future.
Back to the Future is one of the best examples of what I'm saying that you could give me. It is one of the best and tightest and efficient screenplays that exists. It's got a perfect story. It's got everything that's perfect, and it functions like an absolutely well-oiled machine. And that's why now, 30 years later, we keep watching it and enjoying it, because all of the principles that I've been talking about are absolutely meshing. Everything's meshing. You've got great craftsmen, great actors, everyone's on their A game in the service of a fantastic story, doing everything right. If you look at that film, there's not one shot, piece of dialogue, or anything in that story that isn't being paid off or referred to later or set up for a payoff some other time. Everything has got everything to do with the story that we need to know. Right from the opening frames of all of the clocks and all the stuff that we pass, everything's telling a story, even in the subconscious level. Everything is telling you a piece of information that you need later to make this story all work.
Yeah.
And that's why the movie works perfectly. And I think that craft is what more filmmakers need to study. And it gets lost or looked over, I think, that studying that craft.
Yeah.
Because that's what makes the movie good.
Perfect. Couldn't agree. No, that great answer. Now, the thing I want to talk to you about is I'm a massive horror fan. I love any kind of horror, slasher, paranormal, supernatural, you name it, I'll watch it. When Jamie mentioned The Artifice and mentioned that it was of the horror, I thought, okay, I'm going to look. We need to watch it, and we watched it just before I found it on a website. We watched it just before we spoke to you, and I was hooked. I know the legend of the black-eyed children very, very, very well.
Yep.
Because I do all that kind of research, and it was fantastic. So, what led you to go down the path of creating this short film?
That happened just before Ben Hall. Mm-hmm. It was a few months before I started the Ben Hall campaign. I shot that film. We shot it in 2 days. I had heard about the black-eyed kids, through the internet and stuff, and I thought it was an interesting tale. I don't remember when I first heard about it, but I thought that's kind of creepy and spooky. That'd make a cool film. And I always liked the Village of the Damned.
Yes.
Kind of movie with the creepy kids. Kids are creepy, at the best times.
Children of the Corn as well, that kind of thing. Yeah.
Yeah. Innocence that's been inverted into something evil was always a great horror trope. So, because normally kids are innocent, trustworthy, and kind, but if you flip that and you make them untrustworthy, evil, and malevolent, you've got something. That's usually what works with horror. So, I thought, well, because I struggle writing short films. I don't make many short films. I don't write them. I don't try to. I don't have an interest in watching them. I want to make features, but again, it was like, well, why don't I want to make a feature about the black-eyed kids one day, because that could be very marketable. Because I'm always thinking about what's marketable as a filmmaker. You've got to think money, like you've got to have your money hat on. What will sell and push my career to the next level? And so I thought, well, that would sell. And so I didn't have a screenplay for it, like a feature screenplay. So I really just read all the reports of the black-eyed kids, and then I came up with my own encounter based on what I'd read. And we just went out and shot it for fun, because it had been 5 or 6 years since Twin Rivers, and I still hadn't made another film. And I was like, I've really got to get back on the saddle and direct again, even if it's just a short film. So we just did it for fun. And I had lots of interest from the States. At the time I was represented, I had representation in the States as a director, writer, they turned out to be sharks and not very nice people in the end. But they were, when they saw that poster and they saw that short film, they were all over it. And one of the producers of the Final Destination series was all over it. And he actually tried to take it away from me because he wanted to make the next big franchise movie and he thought The Artifice was it. But like I said, they were sharks and I ended up sort of bailing and getting away from them. But there was certainly interest in it. But I couldn't crack the story as a feature. I actually couldn't figure out. It works for a short film, and the Black Eyed Kids works wonderfully for, campfire ghost stories. Mm-hmm. But as a feature, I could never crack that story. What is this in 90 minutes? I had to figure out the questions that are the most difficult to answer, and also the things you sometimes don't want to answer in horror, which is, where do the Black Eyed Kids come from?
Yep.
And what do they want?
Mm-hmm.
And then what happens when they get inside?
Mm-hmm.
And those three questions, every time I tried to come up with one, I wasn't happy with the answer.
Okay.
I didn't like it. It's almost like it ruined the mystery every time I answered any one of those questions. But I couldn't make a movie that didn't answer them. Otherwise, I wouldn't have a story. So I've never been able to crack it as a feature yet. And me and my co-writer have tried, but I don't think we've cracked it yet. So I don't know if I'll ever make a feature of that. I have written a horror though. I wrote a horror when I was in Italy for 3 months. I needed something to do for 3 months while I was holidaying there. So I wrote a horror film, a script for a horror called Blackjack.
Oh.
And it was again, trying to thinking low budget, one location or roughly one location, low budget. What can I do? So I came up with the idea of a man who has agoraphobia, can't leave his house, because the big question is in horror, if something's bothering you at night, leave your house.
Yeah.
But he can't leave his house because he's got agoraphobia, and this entity keeps appearing in his house and tormenting him. And so we come up with a story for that. So, and that's my first foray into horror, because I'm not generally a horror fan.
Mm-hmm.
Unlike you, I tend to keep away from horrors. The horror section behind me is this big. Very few horrors, because I don't get a kick. I don't get a kick out of violence or splatter or hideous, horrible things happening. But there are some horror films that I really appreciate how they make me feel. How does a movie make me feel? If a horror film can really make me feel frightened and creeped out and send chills up my spine, now I respect it because it's making me feel something. But most horror films to me make me feel something I don't want to feel, which is usually just disgust. That disgusts me. I don't want to feel disgust, but I want to feel scared and I want to feel thrilled. So for me, it was about finding a story that thrilled and scared me, and then I'll make that horror film. So I had to find that story, but also it had to say something. That's one thing with every movie I make. Whether it's Bushranger or Ned Kelly, or if it's horror or what I'm doing now, which is a drama. I always think the best movies, and this maybe goes back to your other question, what makes a good movie? Movies should always be about something that's interesting. The window dressing of a movie, say Aliens, right? Yeah. Great movie.
Yes.
It's all about aliens and Marines and tech and going in this great horror adventure sci-fi shoot 'em up, and it's wonderful. But that's not really what the movie is about. The movie is about a woman who's a mother who's lost her child, reconnecting with a child who's lost her mother, and them bonding and finding each other. That's what it's about. And I think every good movie has those two layers.
Yeah.
Which is what I tried to bring to Ben Hall, and I try to bring to every film, as every filmmaker should, is, okay, it's about bushrangers and guns and horses and history, and it's all cool. But this is the story about a man trying to reconnect with his son and dealing with his own torn personality between his good and bad. That's what the movie's really about. Yes. And so I had to find a horror story that had that second story underneath. What is this really about? And that's what I found with Blackjack. it's about a ghoul that oppresses a man in his home, but it had to say something else. It had to have that underlying theme that I was trying to talk about. And when I found that, I was like, great, now I can make and write a horror film because I've got the two things, the two levels now. So,
well, I can assure you, once that gets made, and I know it will because it sounds amazing, I will be front and center for that.
Cool.
But one other question, just before we move on to what you're working on at the moment, in terms of horror, I totally agree with you. I'm yet to really find something that has scared the bejesus out of me. I don't scare very easily, but I know you said your horror section there is quite small. Do you have a horror movie that you would consider your favorite horror movie?
Ooh. Let me have a little look, see if I can remember my favorite horror film.
Like a go-to horror movie when you're like, you know what, I really want to I really feel like watching a horror, like a slasher or paranormal or whatever. What's your go-to?
Oh, it starts blending a bit with like thriller.
Yep.
I like Seven, but it's not horror.
Yeah. Psychological thriller, I'd say. Like it's on the cusp.
It's on the cusp.
Yeah.
And I like that. I think my favorite true horror like film that is actually horror, my personal favorite is The Exorcism of Emily Rose.
Yeah.
I like The Exorcist as well, but I like The Exorcism of Emily Rose because it is one of the few movies that I was watching during the day.
Yep.
And I turned off all of the lights in the house so I could watch the projector and watch it in the dark. But I actually got halfway through it and turned it off and went outside into the sunshine and went, ooh, you know.
Oh, wow, yeah.
Okay, this is creepy as fuck. And because it affected me that much, like it didn't scare me like, it was more it just got under my skin and just creeped me out. That I was like, respect, you have creeped me out. And that's probably the horror film that I'd say I like the most because it's but if it's say like more of a blood horror, you know, and so I would say 28 Days Later. Yeah.
Great answer.
Yeah.
That question was more for me because I'm always looking for, when you described what your ideal horror movie is, it's the same for me. And I just thought, I haven't watched The Exorcism of Emily Rose for a very long time, so it might be time to go back. Maybe that'll be the one. So I appreciate that.
That's all right.
So let's talk about what you're working on right now. So what is it, and is Adam Wilson in it too?
Well, I'll answer the question. We'll start with Adam Wilson. Yes, he's in it.
Oh.
He's in it. He's not in it for very long, but he's in it. He's you know, I've put him in everything I've ever made, so it just when I came to making, it's like, well, there's got to be something for Adam here. I've got to put Adam in it. It didn't feel right. He's kind of my Bill Paxton, James Cameron.
Yes,
I got to put him in everything now. So
I love that analogy. So good.
So he's in it very briefly, and he came and did an evening of filming for us. It's called The Cost, and it was born out of frustration, much like Twin Rivers. When Ben Hur came out, there was a lot of disappointments about its. It didn't get as far as I wanted it to go, and it was a hard sell to a lot of places, and especially here in Australia. More, it did better in America than it did in Australia, both financially and it getting out into the, you know, it did better. It was better received in America in the film festivals, in the general public, and on television and streaming. Much better in the US and in Europe than it was here in Australia. And I lay the blame pretty firmly at our Australian distributors, who did a really and continue to do a terrible job of the film, and really let it down. And so I think. So it was a bit, and for the last 5 years since that film has been released, I have been trying to get project after project up. Blackjack, you know, the other film I was telling you about, Territorial. I had an Australian novel, Bluefin, by Colin Teeley, I was trying to get up. But when Stormboy tanked, there was no point in pursuing that anymore. So I had project after project nearly happen and then fall over. I couldn't get my Ben Hur sequels up because Ben Hur had not made enough money. So, and again, I hit the 5-year mark and I was like, oh my God, like I've got to make another film. I've got to get back on the bandwagon, but I don't want to do another low budget film again because they are a nightmare to make. They are just so hard. And so I was encouraged by my wife and a friend, look, let's just make something. Go and write something small. Don't forget period, forget Bushrangers, forget all your big ideas. Write something really small and personal that you can do with like 3 actors. And of course, that was a challenge. How do you make that interesting? What on earth? But I had a kernel of an idea I had from a few years ago that I thought, again, that's an interesting question, an interesting theme. And I thought, okay, let's write a story about that. And I really just looked at what I had. I knew I had a certain amount of actors that I could rely on to jump on board and do a no-budget, unpaid thing. And I knew I had some access to some property from people that I'd met on Ben Hur. And so I looked at what I had, and I thought, right to my means. Mm-hmm. So I wrote this story called The Cost. It wasn't called The Cost at that point, but it was... and what it was, the germ of the idea was, it came from, I'm sure we've all thought this, when you watch a documentary or you read a news report or you see a movie where the bad guy kills the wife or the kid or something, and you're watching the movie or watching the doco and you go, you know what, if I was that dad or that husband, I'd wait for that guy to get out of prison and then I'd take care of him myself. You know, I would take justice into my own hands and deal with him my way. And I thought, that's an interesting question. What would happen if someone, or in the case of my movie, 2 guys, got hold of the person that they want to do that to and did it? What happens when 2 ordinary people follow through with that thirst for revenge and that vendetta? And I thought, not like a revenge film like Bruce Willis, you know, walking into the bad guys and blowing them all away, but a film that treated it with absolute seriousness, with absolute normal people. And they wanted to dispense their form of justice, and all their revenge fantasies that they've had in their minds all these years of having lost this person, and what they want to do, and they execute the perfect crime, and they're going to get this guy, do away with him and get away with it. That's what they're going to do. I thought, that's an interesting idea and an interesting theme. And so that's where the movie was born out of. And so I wrote that story. What would happen if? And and so wrote it, and it was a very different screenplay to what I ever written. It was much more violent than anything I'd ever written before. But I showed it around and people seemed to really respond to the material and thought the script was a really interesting read, like sort of one of those, a lot of people said it was one of those, I couldn't put it down. I had to see what happened in this script. Again, just following the principles of what makes a good script work that I had learned. And so we went out and started shooting it, and I managed to get a little bit of investment, $10,000 here, $10,000 there, $2,000 here, and just cobbled together enough money to just get a bunch of people and go, right, let's just go out and shoot it. And then COVID hit.
Yeah.
And so we had to delay it. We had to just sit for a year and do nothing. And then we started it, and then we had to break for 6 months and then come back and keep filming. And but along the way, the movie has grown and evolved. It wasn't easy to film, even though it was a very small cast. It's ended up being harder than Ben Hur. And but we're on the tail end of it now. We've only got 6 days left to film. I've edited 95% of the movie. Seems to be flowing together pretty well, and I've now got a company that came on board to help do all the sound and post-production and all that. So it's gaining momentum, and it should be finished by mid this year. So
So have you got a release date for it yet, or?
I don't have a release date, but I know the film will be finished around mid-July, all going to plan, mid-July. When it gets released, don't know. I would assume probably on the a little bit later in this year, it'll get released in some form somewhere. I don't know yet. We don't know where it's going to go because we don't really know what we've got yet. You know, we don't know how it's going to be received. You just don't know because it's a bit of an unknowable. It's not like a a zombie film or a vampire film, you just know you're going to be able to sell that, and pretty much everywhere in the world, and no problem. This film is, like I said, it's different to anything I've made, and it really isn't like any film I know. It's sort of like a deliverance movie.
Okay.
It's part deliverance, part Mean Creek. It's part prisoners, part. It's just a bit of a mix of things, but not like any of them either. So I don't really know what I've got yet, and I don't really know how people are going to respond. So it's all a bit. It's new waters. New waters for me.
I can't wait for that one. That sounds right up my alley. Sounds amazing.
Just so
I hope. What's that?
If these were all books, he'd be buying them right now.
Yeah.
We've interviewed a fair few authors, and he's literally bought every book of every guest we've ever.
Okay. Well, I'm thinking of putting all the Ben Hall prequel scripts. I'm thinking of putting them on Amazon, because I know a lot of people were disappointed when I couldn't make them, and they really wanted to see what I was going to do with the other two movies, which would have made those three movies a trilogy and an overarching story.
Yeah,
sort of encompassing the Bushrangers of that time, because they all knew each other. But I'll never make that now. So it was a real shame that I couldn't do it. But I thought I could make the scripts available for those that are interested to see what would have been. I did when I'd written the cost, and we were literally like, let's go film it. And then COVID hit, and the whole year there's nothing to do in lockdown. And I had nothing to do, so I was complaining about that online, and my producer said, "Why don't you write a shark movie, Matt? Shark movies, I can sell a shark movie like that." And I said, I'm not writing a shark movie. I hate shark movies. Shark, what a load of rubbish. I'm never going to stoop that low. And because there's only one good shark movie, it's Jaws.
Exactly.
And I thought, and the plot of every shark movie since is that same boring, predictable formula. A bunch of gorgeous people go on holiday, the boat or the airplane flips over, or they get stuck somewhere in the water, and then they just got to wait for the shark to come along and one by one take everybody, and that's it. And I thought that's the most boring. I'm never doing that. And he said, well, I can sell a shark movie. And so because nothing else was happening, I thought, all right, it's time to crack that problem. How can I make a shark movie that I'd want to see? How can I make Jaws without making Jaws, but not make it anything like another shark film you've ever seen? And so I finally cracked that code, wrote the script with my co-writer in about 3 or 4 weeks. We got to first draft because we found the story, and then took it to him, and he was like, yeah, this is great. This is great. And within once he took it to the marketplace, buying. They're buying it. We've got all these pre-sales on this shark movie. So that'll probably be the next movie I make. Straight after the cost is finished, I'll go on to making this shark movie, because the market gobbled it up straight away because it was a shark movie. I've never had a screenplay get jumped on so quickly by the marketplace. For years, I've been shopping around other movies, and you get rejection. Bring up a shark movie, and everyone's like, "Oh, I'll take it." So there you go. Shark movies hell.
They keep making Sharknadoes, so.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, they're garbage, but they sell. But that I certainly don't want to make a Sharknado movie or anything like it.
Oh, God, no.
Yeah, it was really just about finding a story that you could take seriously, but that would also be interesting. That happened to have a shark in it. So.
Yeah. Well, we're going pretty long, anticipated. So we might look. I'd love to talk about Star Wars and get you back on sometime to talk about all things Star Wars.
Sure.
But why don't we wrap up with basically the idea that Disney come up to you with a truckload of money and say, make us a film. No, I'm not going to be anal and be like, it has to be this, it has to be that. They won't get involved at all. They just give you the money and they say, Matt, make us a film.
Oh, okay. Oh, crikey. Make us a movie. Any movie I want. I'd probably make my Jason and the Argonauts remake.
Hmm.
I wrote a screenplay a few years ago, Jason and the Argonauts. I love the old movie.
Yeah.
And I read the Greek mythology, like from the original, like the Greek story. And I thought, yeah, you could make this a lot. You could do a lot with this, especially with modern effects and everything. So I actually wrote a Jason the Argonauts screenplay for a huge, epic Jason the Argonauts movie that sort of combined the best of the old movie but also really leaned into the original Greek mythology. So I'd probably say, please let me make my Jason the Argonauts movie. That's what I would say.
And
because that would cost $150 million.
And will you hire or reach out to Sam Rockwell?
For that one? Oh, why not? Why not? He can play Zeus or something. That'll be fun.
Oh, Sam Rockwell as Zeus. I can see it now.
No,
so that's probably what I'd do if Disney gave me the money track. Or I would say, don't give me $150 million. Just come back every 2 years with $10 million.
Yeah.
Just so I can just make $10 million movies. I'd be happy making little $10 million movies the rest of my life.
That's like the equivalent of wishing for more wishes, isn't it? So,
it is a bit.
I like it though.
But I'd rather, I'm not really big into the big blockbuster Marvel movies, the bloated budget, gigantic things. I'd rather happily make $10 million movies every 2-3 years for the rest of my life. I like the smaller, more contained ideas. So the big ones tend to get out of hand, but that's me.
Yeah, and
So
I suppose a lot of those movies could be made on a smaller budget anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah, they don't need to spend that much money, but it's become part of the business model, and a lot of people get very rich because the movies may cost $200 million, but you're not watching $200 million on the screen.
Yeah.
You're watching $100 million on the screen, and the other 100 is going into all the producers and the actors' back pockets before you even get to make the movie. Yeah. So, that it's just a good way for a lot of people to get real rich.
Yeah.
So, anyway.
Well, thank you so much for coming on, Matthew.
Thank you so much.
No worries. Thanks, guys. It's been fun chatting.
Yeah, and just for our listeners, is there any way they can follow you or keep up to date with what you're doing?
At this stage, the best way to keep them up what I'm doing is if there anything happens with Ben Hall, is just follow the Legend of Ben Hall Facebook page. There is also a Facebook page for The Cost.
Yep.
And there will be updates on how that film's going periodically on there. That's probably the best way, just to follow those two pages. And occasionally check in on IMDb and see what I'm up to.
Yep.
So,
well, thanks again.
Thank you.
No worries, guys.
Hey, thanks for watching. If you like what you saw, please remember to hit like, subscribe, and share. And if you're after some more interesting content, then please check out our podcast, Stories, the True and the Fictional. And lastly, if Emu's writing war correspondence sounds like something that you'd be into, then please grab a copy of my book, Letters from the Emu War, based on a true story. You can find it on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Fishpond, and many, many, many more.